It's May of 1991, and in the Northern Ireland seaside village of Castlerock, the bodies of Lesley Clarke, wife of prominent local dentist Colin Howell, and police officer Trevor Buchanan were found in the car of a garage of an empty house, dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. All of the evidence pointed to a suicide pact, so case closed. However, it would take nearly 20 years, a guilty conscience, and a stunning confession for the sinister truth about what really happened to Lesley and Trevor to be revealed. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I am your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love. And this week I'm putting a spotlight on part 1 of the case I'm calling Monsters in the Dark. Born Lesley Ann Elizabeth Clarke on February 24, 1960 in Plymouth, England, to Harry, who was with the Royal Marines, in May, Lesley joined older brother Christopher. After Harry left the service, he went to work for a pet food company and the family moved to Eaglesham in Scotland, then Kilbride, before making Dalkey, which was South Dublin, their home. Lesley came from an extremely devoutly religious family. She was part of an evangelical youth club and later sang in a choir called Daybreak. Despite her religious convictions, Lesley was not immune to sneaking into the pub with her girlfriends once in a while for the occasional Guinness. Described in the book Let This Be Our Secret by Derek Henderson as, quote, bright and intelligent and a very good student, Lesley studied nursing, eventually taking a position in the geriatric unit of the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. One of Lesley's school friends, Valerie Allen, described her to Let This Be Our Secret as, quote, demonstrative and very caring to her patients. She was also very affectionate. She had a lovely way. She would compliment us about how we looked. She was very sweet, intelligent, not quick-tempered or jealous. The petite, outgoing, blue-eyed, dark-haired Lesley was known to have lots of boyfriends, and she really wasn't looking to get serious with anyone. But then, in 1980, devout Christian Lesley would meet her match in the form of dental student Colin Howell. Born on March 14, 1959, Colin Howell hailed from Portadown, a town in County Armagh, Northern Ireland. The fourth of Sam, a civil service employee, and homemaker Sarah's 5 children. Colin and his siblings, brothers Gordon and Jim, and sisters Pauline and Maud, were raised in the Protestant Woodvale district of Belfast, before later moving to the Ballysalon district nearby. Colin wasn't particularly close to his siblings, nor with his mother, Sarah, though he loved and admired her deeply. His person was really his dad, Sam. And in the book, Let This Be Our Secret, Colin says about his relationship with his father, quote, I was Dad's little buddy. Father and son went golfing and fishing together, and according to the book, Sam always regarded Colin as a son he could be proud of. Like Lesley, Colin came from an extremely religious family. The Howells were deeply devoted to their faith. God-fearing Baptists, as Derek Henderson noticed in Let This Be Our Secret, regularly attending Shankle Baptist Church in Belfast. Colin was so committed to his faith, for most of his childhood he attended church services 3 times on Sunday, and by the age of 13 was intent on becoming an overseas missionary, having been swayed by the tales of missionaries who visited the church and shared their experiences. Considered a quiet kid with a lack of confidence and a low self-esteem, but one who never gave anyone any trouble, besides his religious faith, Colin seemed to find great solace in his schoolwork, showing a particular affinity for physics, math, and chemistry. As former headmaster for Portadown College, which is where Colin attended grammar school, Harry Armstrong said in Let This Be Our Secret, Colin was, quote, a perfectly reasonable, well-balanced young man, a hard worker, keen on his studies, a model pupil, really. It was obvious he had his eyes on a professional career. And it was those professional aspirations that led Colin to Queen's University in Belfast, where he qualified to be a dentist, and where he met his first serious girlfriend, Lesley. The couple met at a church get-together, and the romance seemed to get off to a slow start. Colin was fairly inexperienced with women, having been cheated on by one girl he had dated before his first year at Queen's University, and then another time having poured his heart out in a letter to the object of his desire, only for her to start dating the guy Colin had asked to deliver the letter. For her part, Lesley seemed far from enamored with Colin, explaining in letters she wrote to her girlfriend Valerie that she was just not that into him, struggling to explain the relationship to her girlfriend and proclaiming that she and Colin would not be marching up the aisle anytime soon. However, a trip to Greece during the summer of 1982 seemed to turn the tide, as Lesley jokingly wrote to Valerie that despite Colin not being able to achieve any sort of a tan on this trip, she still found she only had eyes for him and that they were having a great summer together. By late 1982, Lesley's feelings for Colin had undergone such a profound change that she was becoming increasingly confident that she had found the one, saying in a letter to Valerie, quote, "Colin and I are getting along famously, and I sometimes marvel at how funny it feels to know someone as well as I know him, and yet he isn't a member of my family." While Colin and Lesley were both dedicated to their strict religious beliefs, it didn't stop them from sleeping together. It also didn't stop Lesley from getting pregnant 3 different times, resulting in 3 different agreed-upon abortions, 2 of them occurring only a few weeks apart. Colin had been pretty adamant that his bride be a virgin and that he be one as well, and that once they married, he would be faithful until death did them part. Lesley, again, was Colin's first serious girlfriend and the first girl he'd ever slept with. Lesley would later tell a girlfriend that she feared, if she didn't agree to the abortions, that Colin would break off the engagement. Now, he didn't pay for them, she did, though he did go with her each time, so that's something. And according to Let This Be Our Secret, Colin claimed to be having doubts about marrying Lesley, but his stringent religious beliefs dictated that because they'd already slept together and gone through all of these abortions, nobody else would want them, so marrying each other was their only alternative. It's almost like he's thinking of them as like damaged goods or something. Both Lesley and Colin felt extreme guilt about the abortions, and it would weigh heavily on both of them as the years passed. Despite whatever doubts either of them may have had, on July 16, 1983, Colin and Lesley said "I do" at Windsor Baptist Church in Belfast. Following a honeymoon in Spain, the couple moved to the North Coast, where Colin would go to work for an established dental practice in Coleraine, a small town with some of the most expensive homes in Northern Ireland. They rented a house in Port Ballantrae, which overlooked the harbor, before moving into a home of their own about 9 months later. The newlyweds seemed off to a great start, and Lesley even joined a small local Bible study and prayer group comprised of other young married women, some with kids, taking turns meeting at each other's homes each week. And it became clear that whatever doubts Lesley may have harbored about Colin in the early days of their relationship, those were gone completely. As described in Let This Be Our Secret, at one of those Bible study meetings, the group discussed mere mortals who they felt could be modeled on Jesus. And apparently Lesley, without missing a beat, declared, quote, "That would be Colin." Not long after moving to Coleraine, Lesley and Colin began their family in earnest, having their first child, Matthew, in 1984, followed in quick succession by Lauren, Daniel, and Johnny, each child about 2 years apart. While Colin built his dental practice, Lesley's nursing career was long in the rear view as she devoted herself to being a stay-at-home mom to the couple's young children. To accommodate their growing brood, the Howells moved into a bigger, nicer home at Knocklady Park near Castlerock Road, still in Coleraine. Both Lesley and Colin remained devoted to their faith, serving as active members of Coleraine Baptist Church. Colin led the youth fellowship at the church and was also involved in its uniformed campaigners group for teens, while Lesley led women's groups and was an engaged member of the church's regular Bible study. Now, if you didn't know any better, you would think that the Howells were the perfect, proper, upwardly mobile, God-fearing family. If you didn't know any better. Because the truth is, upstanding citizen, Dr. Devout Baptist Colin was having an affair with the church's Sunday school teacher, a woman by the name of Hazel Buchanan. Blonde beauty Hazel Elkin was born in March of 1963 to dairy farmers Peggy and Jack Elkin of Omagh in County Tyrone. Hazel was one of 10 children, 5 sisters, 4 brothers, and like Colin's family, like Lesley's family, the Elkins were devoted Baptists. Jack was a church elder, and the Elkin family attended services multiple times a week. As noted in Let This Be Our Secret, Hazel wasn't exactly enamored with dairy farming, being far more consumed with clothes and makeup. She was described as an average student with some affinity for athletics, though far from a star, and teachers viewed her as, quote, vague and a bit standoffish. But aside from the odd scrape or two, she never caused any real trouble. Hazel's longing to escape the farm is likely what led to her marriage at the age of 18 to 22-year-old Trevor Buchanan, an aspiring Royal Ulster Constabulary officer. 3 of Trevor's 5 brothers were already RUC officers, which no doubt influenced his longing to become one. Though Trevor was in his early 20s, teenage Hazel was his first serious girlfriend, and so he snapped her up, marrying her on July 11, 1981 in a huge ceremony at Omagh Baptist Church. Trevor wasn't nearly as religious as Hazel, but nevertheless, he wanted to please his new wife, so he became a regular churchgoer, eventually finding great meaning in his faith. This wasn't the only way that Hazel influenced her husband. He stopped smoking, and under Hazel's watchful eye, he pulled back on his drinking. She would even count his drinks to make sure that he was only drinking a little and not going full-on wasted. Now, by all accounts, Trevor really was a social drinker, but because it wasn't something that Hazel necessarily approved of, Trevor worked really hard at being diligent about not drinking too much because, above all else, Trevor was committed to doing whatever he could to make Hazel happy. Except it never seemed to be enough. A friend of the Buchanans noted in Let This Be Our Secret, quote, Trevor treated her like the queen. The house was furnished to absolute perfection. She got anything she wanted, but she was not content. It wasn't good enough. His sister, Valerie Blakely, echoed this in the book, saying, quote, Trevor was almost in awe of Hazel. He hung on her every word. Whatever she wanted, he provided, no matter how he got it. She always wanted nice things, nice clothes, nice furniture. That is my image of Hazel. He obviously thought she was good for him. The couple would go on to have 2 children, Lisa and Andrew, and in 1986, the Buchanans moved to Charmwood Park in Coleraine and joined Coleraine Baptist Church, which is Colin and Lesley's church. Hazel initially meets Colin at the church playgroup. By the time he meets Hazel, Colin has already had at least one affair during his marriage. The ever-restless, always slightly discontent Hazel was working part-time at a local nursery as a way to get out of the house and do something more than be just a wife and a mother. Hazel's marriage to Trevor was far from a happy one, with his demanding job and its long hours adding to Hazel's unhappiness, which led to frequent fights. Besides her new job, Hazel was finding the fleeting conversations she was having with Colin as one of the few bright spots in her days. Colin and Hazel would run into each other at the church playgroup, at the school that their children attended, as well as the local swimming pool, where they would take their children for swim lessons. With the kids busy learning the backstroke, Hazel and Colin were having their own lessons on the other side of the pool, Colin apparently taking it upon himself to teach Hazel a thing or two. As the Sunday World noted, quote, with his hands supporting her body as she practiced the front crawl, Colin confessed, quote, I'm not having innocent thoughts about you. Hazel, unfazed by his disclosure, replied, well, I'm not that innocent myself. And so, with his wife Lesley heavily pregnant with their 4th child in the summer of 1990, Colin and Hazel begin an affair. While Hazel seemed initially to wrestle with the adultery, it didn't stop her from continuing to sleep with Colin throughout the summer of 1990, their rendezvous spot being Castle Row Forest Park. However, in August, the fun and games came to a screeching halt when Hazel realized she was pregnant. She panics, of course, because who's the baby daddy, her husband or her lover? Colin, however, is unbothered, telling Hazel it wasn't a problem. He knew just what to do. Because remember, he got Lesley pregnant 3 times before they got married, and as a result, she had 3 abortions. And Colin actually takes Hazel to the same clinic where he took Lesley. Crazily enough, when Hazel went away for the night to have the procedure done, she actually left Trevor a note that said, quote, "Going through a really hard time. Don't worry about me. Don't try to find me. I'll be back in a few days. Love you." And when she got home the next night, Trevor was just happy that she'd come home sooner rather than later, and he didn't even ask her any questions. Where had she been? What did you do? Meanwhile, Hazel was happy that she'd pulled one over on her husband. Except Hazel wouldn't be getting away with anything for long because she and Colin got busted. In September of 1990, a fellow parishioner from the church saw Hazel and Colin at the park where they liked to meet, and that congregant told Pastor John Hansford about seeing them there. Now, he's the pastor at their church that they all go to. And as it happens, a distressed Lesley, who had just given birth to baby Johnny, had already confided in the pastor her worries about the amount of time Colin was spending with Hazel. The pastor went to the source, visiting Colin at his dental practice and asking him straight out if he and Hazel were having an affair. No surprise, Colin said, absolutely not. Well, the pastor was not born yesterday, and so he goes to the other source, Hazel, and he asks her. According to the Sunday World, Pastor Hansford said Hazel took the long way around to answering the question, saying, quote, "She mentioned that Trevor was an ordinary guy and reflected on her own childhood and upbringing, which she said was restrictive. She said that she wished Trevor was more of an exciting husband." After the pastor counseled Hazel to appreciate Trevor for what a fine and upstanding man and husband he was, unexciting though he may have been, Hazel drove him home and she cracked, admitting that she and Colin were having an emotional affair, though she did not cop to the physical affair. Well, the pastor, again, not born yesterday, and does not buy this, and he goes to the Howell home to see Lesley and tell her that her suspicions are true, that there is something going on with her husband and Hazel. And they wait for Colin to come home from work, and they confront him. Well, he's cornered now, and he's got no choice but to confess that, yes, he and Hazel are having an affair. Each of the 4 players in this sordid little saga handled the unearthing of this secret differently. Colin repented and vowed to do better. Trevor admitted to being absolutely gutted. Hazel embarked on a rigorous self-care routine, hitting up the tanning salon, going on a diet, changing her hair, going to exercise classes. Lesley, however, she is beyond devastated. Her response is to OD on sleeping pills. As a result, she is admitted to a local hospital. After she was released, Lesley asked Pastor Hansford to help her pull her marriage back from the brink. Hazel and Trevor had also decided that they wanted to work on their marriage. So the 2 couples committed to counseling from the church and were instructed to follow a set of rigid rules that were designed to rebuild the 2 marriages and restore peace in the valley. Among the rules, Hazel would resign as Sunday school teacher, and neither she nor Colin would be allowed communion for a time. And the couples were not allowed to attend the same church services. So if one went to the mornings, one family went to the morning service, the other family would have to go to the afternoon service. Colin threw himself back into the church, determined to regain his lofty position of respect and dignity within the parish. And Hazel did her part by not being alone with Colin. The quad met with the pastor regularly for marital counseling, and the sessions revealed that Lesley and Trevor felt inferior to their spouses, and in their own ways that likely contributed to the problems in their respective marriages. Colin apologized profusely to the overwhelmingly non-confrontational Trevor, and eventually the counseling sessions were deemed a success. Everyone was cured, life could go back to the way it should be. Pastor Hansford was so convinced that the Howells and the Buchanans were well on their way to going back to the proper order of things. He arranged to take a trip to India for 6 weeks, and according to the Sunday World, before he left, he told Colin, quote, "Hazel is doing well. She's moved on, and so should you." Well, like a kid who can't resist the cookie jar, Colin had to find out for himself. And so, in March of 1991, he called Hazel. And when she picked up, he said it was like, quote, holding your breath. And when Hazel was glad to hear from me, it was like coming up for air, the wrong sort of air. And then Hazel told him, quote, I will love you until I'm old and gray. And that is all it took. Hazel and Colin started once again to bang the gong. So Colin got pretty brazen and diabolical, frankly, in his zeal to be alone with Hazel. Trevor, remember, he's working long hours as a police officer, so Hazel, she doesn't have to make any excuses to, get out of the house. And to solve his Lesley problem, Colin gave his wife tranquilizers that she chased with red wine before passing out, which allowed him to leave the house undetected. I hope there was a babysitter or somebody there because there are 4 young children in the house, and this is just terrible. So while Trevor was somewhat philosophical about the affair, devastated though he was just happy to have his wife back. So he thought. Lesley, meanwhile, just could not get past Colin's continued betrayal. Now, he didn't help matters, of course. She found, for example, condoms in his gym bag. And another time, she discovered an abundance of extra change in his jogging pants. Now, this was pre-cell phone, and it turns out that he was using all of these coins that he had to call Hazel from a payphone. I have to imagine that Lesley probably feels stuck with Colin, stuck with her life. She gave up a career she loved for him and for the marriage, and he's screwing around while she's home with 4 kids all day. She remains haunted by the multiple abortions she had before they got married. And her religious convictions won't allow her to entertain the possibility of divorce. She really must have felt like she had nowhere to go. And rightly so, she had grown suspicious that her husband had resumed the affair with Hazel, accurate, and confronted him. So one night they're home, and at one point she was getting in the bathtub and had, I'm guessing, like a boom box. Remember those? She had this in the bathroom with her, and Colin warned her not to put it in a certain spot because it could fall into the tub. As the Sunday World reported, Colin's mind went there as he confessed, quote, it was a dark moment, and she wouldn't let go of the argument that I had contacted Hazel. A thought went through my head. I want you to shut up. And I thought if I threw it in, I would kill you, although I'd no intention of doing that. I showed Lesley the plug. I was in control. And with the unsecured loop of the cable, I flicked it across her back, then dropped the plug on the floor where it made a noise. Lesley looked at me. There was a pregnant pause and a shift of power. I was about to take power, and I wanted her to realize that. I flicked the cable and walked out of the door. The Sunday World noted that Lesley told a friend about what happened, saying, quote, I'm telling you this in case anything happens to me. And as if Lesley is not suffering enough, the family is in dire straits financially. Colin's dental practice is not going well, and they were falling behind on their house payments. She can't even withdraw any money from the ATM. She's also drinking more and taking more sleeping pills. And in another blow, her father, Harry, died on May 7th, 1991. Lesley is devastated by this, and she goes into an emotional tailspin. So just to roll back for a moment, so when Lesley had taken an overdose of pills a few months prior, and she went to the hospital, she had written a suicide note to Colin, thanking him for the, quote, good times in our marriage, and that she just wanted to go to sleep, and that, quote, if I wake up in the morning, just let this be our secret. All my love, Lesley. And during one of the many fights that Lesley had with Colin afterwards, she declared that maybe he and Hazel would be better off if she and Trevor were dead. That statement, coupled with the suicide note that Lesley had written that was now in her husband's possession, starts Colin's wheels turning, because by this point, he is desperate to be with Hazel. Next week on part 2 of Monsters in the Dark, Colin hatches an appalling plan that he believes will clear the way for he and Hazel to be together forever. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to be notified about new episodes. You can also find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus material and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.